Subcommittee will come to order. Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good morning. On behalf of the Subcommittee on Health, I would like to welcome Dr. Francis Collins. And I know many of my colleagues have admired your work as a researcher on the important Genome Project and now in your leadership role at NIH. Americans take great pride in the work of NIH, whose roots date back to 1887. During that time, NIH has been in the forefront of biomedical discoveries that have revolutionized the field of medicine, including deciphering the genetic code and finding treatments and cures for so many diseases. More than 80 Nobel Prizes have been awarded for NIH-sponsored research. This record clearly shows that NIH is a premier research institution and a great American achievement. Since 1887, when it operated as a one-room laboratory, NIH is now a large system of 27 institutes and centers. With the passage of the NIH Reform Act of 2006, Congress addressed some of the downside of that rapid growth in order to improve outcomes. I look forward to an update on the implementation of the Reform Act, especially the role of the Scientific Management Review Board and the Common Fund. NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, is a new institute at NIH designed to catalyze technology towards the diagnosis and treatment of disease. Even though this is the first year of its operation, I would like to learn about its progress and the funding of a pilot program which partners with pharmaceutical companies to resurrect older drugs for new therapeutic uses. Finally, Americans expect us to spend their tax dollars wisely. It is therefore very important that we set good priorities. Faced with so many good causes, I would like to know how NIH identifies the highest priorities in biomedical research and then uses the review process to fund the best research. I'd like to yield the rest of my time to the Vice Chairman of the Health Subcommittee, Dr. Burgess.
And I thank the Chair for yielding, and Dr. Collins, welcome to our committee. Anytime that we get to spend a few hours with one of the premier minds in research science in the United States of America and indeed the world, it's a good thing, and it's a good thing for our committee to have you here. Certainly, all of us on this committee understand the importance of medical research conducted at the National Institute of Health. I just have to say, in reading over your testimony in preparation for today, the concept of a small, inexpensive, high-powered microscope that can attach to your iPhone to give you information about the safety of drinking water, all I have to say is there an app for that? You guys are doing the research. Will, with the aid of the private sector, lead to the next great treatments of the next century. This committee's commitment to authorizing the funding for National Institute of Health has allowed you to become one of the premier government health research foundations in the world. And certainly, we should all be concerned that we maintain that forward thinking and that we do not lose our position as the world's premier leader in research. We are obviously going to be looking to you to answer questions, some questions that are new, some that have been raised in the past. How are we doing? How are we doing with keeping the lines of communication open between you and the head of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and of course with the Food and Drug Administration interposed between the laboratory bench and the delivery system? How is that bottleneck being resolved? How are genomics changing the way that we identify and we treat disease? And certainly in regard to the National Institute of Health Reform Act, which created a formal planning process, the mechanism to fund interdisciplinary research projects, and a grant of more coordinating authority to the director, are you able to sharpen your focus on diseases and conditions that heretofore have been such formidable challenges to research, your community, and of course the world at large? I'm particularly interested to hear about the gains that you've made with translational research at the National Institute of Health. We need to know what research has been funded by the Director's Office that allows the allocation of funds from national research institutes to centers to award grants for high-impact, cutting-edge medical research, the intramural or extramural activities that go on that fund not just research at NIH, but also at institutions of higher learning, congressional districts throughout the country. We've got a lot of ground to cover this morning. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes for opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we continue to work our way out of the recession towards a thriving economy that offers economic opportunities to all Americans, we must out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build the rest of the world. NIH is a driving force behind the biomedical research that has advanced and continues to improve the health of Americans and strengthen the U.S. economy. Thanks in large part to NIH research, Americans are living longer, living healthier, and suffering less from morbidity and mortality of countless diseases when compared to the past. Not only has the general health of the nation improved, but these gains have added an estimated $3.2 trillion annually to the U.S. economy since 1970. NIH funds critical biomedical research in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. It remains a leader not only in the American biomedical industry, but also serves as a significant and sustainable part of our economy. Now, let me use New Jersey as an example. New Jersey is home to more than 2,000 biotechnology companies, institutes, and research facilities. During fiscal year 2004 to 2009, NIH awarded $198 million to New Jersey biological science companies and venture capital firms and invested an additional $4.1 million in biomedical firms during this period. NIH also spurs innovation. In fiscal year 2011 alone, 28 New Jersey businesses received NIH grants towards R&D technology with potential commercial applications, and $4.9 million was awarded to train the next generation of scientists. In my district alone, nearly $115 million was awarded in grants to research institutes in fiscal year 2011. And this helped not only provide jobs to establish a rich biomedical environment for our current and future workforce, but also helped support the Rutgers University Cell and DNA Repository, the largest university-based repository in the world that maintains samples for the study of aging, longevity, substance use, and neurological disorders. And the impact of the grants is not limited to universities. Between 2000 and 2010, 37 startups were formed based on Rutgers University research. It's often said that government can support and advance initial research that is developed by the private sector. Declining or stagnant federal funding for research and development has an impact on all our sectors of our workforce. It's been estimated that for every dollar of NIH funding, we generate $2.1 in local economic growth. A report from United Medical released in May argued that public investment in biomedical research has a dual benefit. By establishing the biomedical foundation upon which industries can build, public funding also has a private rate of return of 30% and a public return of at least 37%. Extensive studies have shown consistently that public investment in health and biomedical research improves health outcomes, alleviates burdens of disease, bolsters the infrastructure for our workforce, and provides quality jobs in our communities and states. Again, using New Jersey as an example, New Jersey has been ranked as one of the largest R&D employers in the U.S. with more than 211,000 jobs supported by health R&D, including 50,000 direct jobs in health R&D. And the same report shows the economic impact in New Jersey is $60 billion. Economic research shows that public R&D and private R&D are mutually beneficial, they complement each other, and one cannot be substituted for the other. And we do need to be honest. These are difficult economic times, but while our circumstances are mirrored in the international arena, our counterparts in Europe and Asia are steadily increasing their investments for biomedical research despite limited resources because of the long-term impacts on their citizens' health and their economy. America's competitiveness and status as a global leader depends on our ability to innovate and support bright, creative minds, transforming discoveries into health benefits and a stable future. So the government must be responsible for facilitating an environment where Americans can continue to innovate. If government abandons its role, we run the real risk of squandering too many opportunities. And this should serve as an important call to us that only makes our role all the more critical. Are we willing to allow dramatic cuts and decreases in funding to jeopardize our ability to fight cancer, infectious disease, chronic illness, and the development of critical components of our workforce and industry? I think we have a responsibility to the future now more than ever by making wise investments that can lead to so many innovative discoveries, the reduction of disease, and so much in direct and cascading economic benefits. That's the key to creating new thriving industries that will produce millions of good jobs here at home and a better future for the next generation. So, Mr. Chairman, I think it's about priorities. Americans' quality of life and bolstering our economy should be our top priorities. Government can plant the seeds, often with modest investments, relative to the long-term payoffs in new products, new discoveries, new jobs, and economic growth. And greater funding and support for NIH addresses both these priorities, and it's a way to keep the U.S. healthy, strong, and competitive. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very important hearing.
Chair thanks the gentleman and now recognizes the Chair Emeritus of the full committee, Mr. Martin, for 5 minutes for opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Pitts and Ranking Member Pallone. I want to thank also Mr. Waxman and Mr. Upton, Chairman Upton. This is a hearing that is being done, I won't say primarily at my request, but it is a hearing that I have asked this subcommittee to hold. I think everyone on the committee remembers that back in 2006, when I was chairman, we did pass the NIH reauthorization bill, first major reauthorization of the National Institutes of Health in, I believe, 13 years or maybe even longer. The NIH is the gold star for medical research in the world. Under Speaker Gingrich's leadership and Subcommittee Chairman John Porter's leadership, a number of years ago, we doubled the budget of NIH. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we've not been able to give NIH those sorts of additional resources. But the reform NIH reauthorization bill did give extra flexibility to the NIH. It created what we call the Common Fund. It helped reorganize the NIH and has been implemented, I think, in a fairly effective fashion. Today we're here to hear from the director, the distinguished doctor, how that reauthorization is proceeding, and also get his input on the things that perhaps need to be done and need to be done legislatively that haven't been done. We want to make sure that the NIH is productive. We want to make sure that it's effective. And to the extent that we can increase funding, we want to provide transparency so that the public knows how their money is being spent. We also want to increase the communication and collaboration within the NIH and to as large an extent possible eliminate duplicity and redundancy. We also want to encourage emerging scientific opportunities, and I know the director is going to speak probably at some length on that. The reauthorization bill from 2006 has expired. It is my hope that this hearing will lay the foundation to perhaps in this Congress, and if not in this Congress, in the next Congress, to do another reauthorization bill of the NIH. I want to thank you, Dr. Collins, for your leadership at the NIH, also for your friendship and your cooperation with me and other members of this subcommittee and the full committee. With that, Mr. Chairman, I can yield the balance of my time to someone else.
Mr. Lance from New Jersey.
I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for yielding, Mr. Chairman Emeritus. Since the passage of the National Cancer Act of 1971, there's been significant progress in the understanding of cancer biology, risk factors, treatments, and prognosis of many types of cancer. However, in the past 40 years, we have yet to see significant progress in the diagnosis and treatment of pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is the fourth leading cause of cancer deaths in the United States. It will take the life of over 37,000 Americans this year, 74% of whom will die within a year of diagnosis. In fact, the 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer is 6%. The only major cancer that continues to have a 5-year survival rate in single digits, and a number that has remained virtually unchanged for 40 years. It is projected that the number of new pancreatic cancer cases will increase by 55% between 2010 and 2030. Despite these harrowing statistics, the National Cancer Institute does not have a comprehensive strategic plan to address the disease and is currently allocating little more than 2% of its research budget to do so. My Democratic colleague on the committee, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo of California, and I have introduced the Pancreatic Cancer Research and Education Act that would do just that. It has broad bipartisan support with 245 co-sponsors. We believe this bill is the important first step toward improving the chances of survival for pancreatic cancer patients. Thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes for opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today we have the great pleasure of hearing from the Director of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Francis Collins. In addition to his responsibilities as the head of NIH, Dr. Collins is a renowned researcher who, among many other scientific achievements, led the government's effort to map the human genome. We're delighted to have you with us, Dr. Collins. Regardless of our political point of view, Democrats or Republicans, I know all members agree that NIH is one of the federal government's real gems. Indeed, across the country and around the globe, NIH is viewed as the preeminent biomedical research institution, and with good reason. NIH research has resulted in not only cutting-edge scientific breakthroughs, it has also led to real and meaningful improvements in the public's health. From its work on cancer to hepatitis B, hypertension to H1N1 virus, HIV/AIDS to Alzheimer's disease, to name just a few of our most pressing medical concerns, NIH researchers have made discoveries, developed treatments, and even found cures, allowing us to live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. But the work of NIH is never done. As we learn more about disease and the human condition, the list of research challenges grows. Some 40 years ago, for example, we thought a single targeted war on cancer was all that we needed to wipe out that illness. Today, of course, through the efforts of NIH and National Cancer Institute, we understand that cancer in all of its many forms is a far more complex situation. It's in fact a series of diseases with some unexpected commonalities in tumors from one disease site to the next. Thus, the NIH portfolio of cancer research has grown significantly and become more sophisticated and multifaceted. Because of its outstanding work, we continue to look to NIH to solve the trickiest of medical riddles, such as diabetes, autism, MS, spinal cord injury, Parkinson's disease, among others. And we must also look to NIH to figure out how to prevent diseases and disability wherever we can. Meeting these expectations demand nothing less than the best researchers, exceptional grant applications, strong leadership, and sustained funding. Our job, the job of Congress, is to ensure that NIH has the stable funding it needs to continue its world-class work and global leadership. And money is in short supply, I know, but federal support for NIH is not where we can afford to cut back. At this juncture of endless research possibilities, both basic and translational, and tough economic times, Dr. Collins comes before us to discuss he and how NIH expect to address these major challenges. We're looking forward to his testimony. I worry about the sequestration and automatic cuts in programs that will happen. I'm glad I voted against that bill to call for mindless sequestrations on the budget of domestic and spending as well as defense spending. It is not the way to run a government. And, of course, you're faced with that cloud hanging over your head. It's unfair and it's unfortunate. I have additional time, and I'd like to yield it to Ms. Schakowsky.
Thank you for yielding. Dr. Collins, I am so happy to see you here before this committee, and I am such a great admirer of yours. My good friend, Dr. Paul Farmer, who is known for his international work, spoke at a graduation ceremony at Northwestern, and he was saying that sometimes bureaucracies are hampered by a failure of imagination. And when I think of someone who is not so limited, I think of you, Dr. Collins, as someone who really is a visionary in the possibilities that how the United States can be such a great leader in developing the cures and the treatments for diseases that have plagued us for so long. I also want to thank you for your role in the implementation of a part of the the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, the patient-centered outcomes research provisions. There are a number of things in Obamacare I think that will make your job easier. The ACA authorized Cures Acceleration Network program and elevates the National Center on Minority Health and Health Disparities at NIH. So I look forward to your testimony and doing everything I can to help you in your mission. Thank you.
All right, that completes the opening statements to the members. We have one witness today, and I'd like to introduce today's witness at this point. Dr. Francis Collins is the director of the National Institutes of Health. As director, he oversees the work of the largest supporter of biomedical research in the world, spanning the spectrum from basic to clinical research. Dr. Collins is an elected member of the Institute of Medicine and the National Academy of Sciences. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2007. He's received the National Medal of Science in 2009. We're very happy to have you with us today, Dr. Collins. Your written testimony will be made a matter of the record. You're recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your testimony before the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I want to thank each of you for your continued support of NIH's mission, which is science in pursuit of fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to extend healthy life and reduce the burdens of illness and disability. And some of my material will be up here on the slides. I couldn't help but also notice in this morning's Washington Post an op-ed from Fareed Zakaria pointing out also the economic benefits which this particular author was taken by. For instance, that $3.8 billion that the Human Genome Project required from the government sources led to $796 billion in economic activity and raised $244 billion in personal income within the first 7 years of its completion. So certainly we also would say that medical research is not just good for your health, it's good for the economy as well. In my written testimony, I've summarized some of the numerous challenges and opportunities that NIH faces. And understanding you want me to be brief in my opening statement, I'm just going to focus on a few points. One is that you asked me to update you on implementation of the NIH Reform Act of 2006 and to report on this new National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, or NCATS as we call it. About 7 years ago, this committee began work on an ambitious reauthorization of NIH. Your goals were clear. Give NIH's scientific leadership greater flexibility to pursue new research opportunities, create new mechanisms and structures to enable swift and facile collaboration amongst NIH's 27 institutes and centers, and increase the transparency in NIH's portfolio and the accountability of its scientific management. The technological revolution we are seeing right now in biomedical research and the flexibilities that you granted NIH in the Reform Act have enabled us to respond more nimbly to a major challenge in getting therapies to patients. In recent years, as you can see here, researchers have succeeded in identifying the causes of more than 4,500 diseases. That's the good news. But unfortunately, treatments only exist for about 250 of them. So at the same time we have all these new molecular targets within our sights, we face a situation in which only a few of the thousands of compounds that enter the drug development pipeline will make it into the medicine cabinet. As you can see here, it takes an average of 14 years for an idea of a new therapeutic to actually reach the market. And the failure rate is more than 95%. And when you have to add up the cost of all those failures, it takes $1 billion or more to bring a drug to market. An engineer looking at this pipeline would say, wait a minute, there's got to be a better way. To address this challenge, I asked the Reform Act's Scientific Management Review Board to consider whether there is more that NIH could do in collaboration with the private sector. They studied the issue intensively, took much public testimony, and in December 2010, they endorsed the creation of a new center, a National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, specifically to address the bottlenecks in the discovery pipeline. So now working in collaboration, not competition, with the private sector, NCATS is designed to support rigorous scientific research to re-engineer the drug development process and move basic research findings into treatments for patients more quickly and more safely. The path to the creation of NCATS followed the guidelines you put forward in the NIH Reform Act, and NCATS was created on December 23rd of last year. Just 4 months later, NIH was able to announce a major new initiative entitled Discovering New Therapeutic Uses for Existing Molecules. So how does this work? Working with several pharmaceutical companies, NCATS is offering scientists a shortcut, access to drugs that have already been tested and proven safe in humans, but failed to show efficacy for the original application. Investigators in academia or in small businesses will have a chance to see if these drugs might work on other conditions or diseases. As an example of how this can work, consider that AZT was developed as a cancer drug, but it became the first effective therapy for AIDS patients. Another example, raloxifene, developed for osteoporosis, now found to be highly effective for breast cancer. We want to make this approach of repurposing more systematic. So in a nutshell, here's how this will work. 8 companies have agreed, you can see them here, to make a total of 58 compounds available through NIH, we're the matchmaker, to researchers all across the nation. Each of these compounds has already had tens or sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars of private money invested in its development, and it's now being crowdsourced to researchers in all sectors to find new uses for these old drugs. The goal is to find new ways of helping patients who suffer from diseases that currently lack a treatment. Let me just conclude by saying something about a patient story that illustrates the promise we see every day in NIH research as we seek to address the challenges of Alzheimer's disease, cancer, Lyme disease, influenza, obesity, diabetes, and many other research frontiers. I want to tell you about Kathy Hutchinson. She's a 58-year-old woman who became a quadriplegic after suffering a devastating brainstem stroke 15 years ago. Now, just last month, NIH-supported researchers reported using a neural interface called BrainGate to train Ms. Hutchinson to use her own thoughts to control the movements of a robotic arm. And those results were published in the journal Nature, and this video shows Kathy using the robotic arm in an attempt, using just her thoughts, to pick up and take a sip of her coffee. On that very first day, she was successful. I think the smile on Kathy's face and on the face of the young researcher behind her tells you everything you need to know about the promise of NIH research in just this one example. So thanks for your time and interest this morning, and thank you for your support of NIH. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Collins, for that wonderful testimony. And I'll begin the questioning and recognize myself for 5 minutes for that purpose. The grant process at NIH is very important and hopefully is rigorous and transparent to ensure that the best projects that address the highest priorities are chosen. One step that generally raises a lot of discussion is the peer review process. I have a few questions about that process, if you can address them. First, how does NIH select reviewers, and how are review panels formed? Secondly, what criteria do reviewers use, and how are the criteria scored? And how does NIH ensure that the criteria are applied? Take those two first.
Well, I very much appreciate your question, Mr. Chairman. Peer review is the mainstay of how we make sure that the taxpayers' dollars are utilized to support the very best science. Our peer review system at NIH is considered as the gold standard for the rest of the world, but we're constantly trying to improve it. Basically, peer reviewers are chosen in a particular area of science and medicine because of their expertise. We seek to identify those who have both detailed expertise about a technology that may be under a review, but also a broader picture about where that particular field has been and where it's going. The reviewer choices are made by our scientific staff, and these are scientific review administrators who are talented, doctoral trained individuals who have chosen, many of them out of a feeling of public service, to give their careers to this effort of making sure our peer review process is done in a fashion that is as exquisitely correct as possible. Those reviewers are then brought together. They are given a series of grants that have been received. They are assigned so that each grant has oftentimes a primary and a secondary reviewer who read it in great detail, but the entire study section looks at all of the grants. And then there is a discussion about what the merits are and what the risks are in terms of failure of particular proposals. The reviewers then are asked to assign a numerical score to that particular application between 1 and 9. 1 is good, 9 is not good. And they debate around the table the merits of this, so there's a real-time conversation so that everybody in the room has a chance to weigh in, and you learn from those who maybe know something special about this. And they vote not only a single priority score, an overall priority score, but also for various characteristics. And one of the ones that we've recently added is innovation. We want a specific priority set on the basis of innovation. When the dust all settles, those scores are tallied up, averaged, and then that is reported to our second level of review, which are the advisory councils that each of the 27 institutes has at their disposal, and they aim to try to balance out the portfolio. The first level is about scientific merit. The second level is where are the needs greatest here in terms of where medical research needs to fill in gaps.
Okay, a couple of other questions I had are there different levels in the review process and who makes the final decision? Can applicants appeal the review process? And how does NIH provide transparency for the research funded at NIH? Websites, databases? Who's responsible for overseeing the databases and ensuring that they are current?
So the final decision, ultimately, after these two levels of review, is made by the institute director, who is presented with the final results and then signs off on them. In terms of transparency, the way in which all of the funded grants are made available is through a website, which is very heavily utilized, called Reporter. I'd encourage you to go and have a look if you want to see what it is that we're funding in the roughly 50,000 grants that are currently being supported. You can see there from the abstracts what the research is all about, who the investigators are, what the goals are.
All right. Maybe you could have your staff meet with our committee staff to go over the process a little bit more. We have some other questions that we could ask, if you would. One final question. NIH has been working closely with the FDA on regulatory science and other matters. Are you working with the FDA to craft a timely clearance pathway for next-gen sequencing? And if so, what specific role are you playing?
So the FDA has for many years been looking at the very rapid advances in DNA sequencing, and now with the costs having come down from perhaps $100 million to sequence a genome 10 years ago to less than 10,000, there's a great deal of interest in having this find its way into medical care for many different conditions, particularly cancer. FDA has been studying carefully the issue about how to oversee that kind of DNA testing, given that much of it is done in laboratories as opposed to being distributed in kits. And that discussion is still going on in terms of how to balance the desire to be sure that individuals are given credible information that correctly can advise them about their medical care, but not do so in a heavy-handed way that would slow down this remarkable innovation that's happening right now. I brought along with me, by the way, a DNA sequencing machine. When I was in charge of sequencing the human genome, the sequencing machines were as big as phone booths. This is what they look like now. The sort of marriage of biotechnology and integrated circuits has happened, and it's pretty impressive.
Thank you. My time has expired. Yield 5 minutes to Ranking Member Ms. Plone for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Collins, during these tough times, we in Congress are often told that without sustainable budgets and some degree of certainty, it's not feasible to maintain growth and development in the private sector. But so I wanted to ask you, with regard to the public sector, NIH, how does operating on continuing resolutions and the threat of a sequestration affect your ability to maintain constant funding to the best and brightest scientists and adequately address the numerous health burdens represented in the NIH research portfolio?
Well, thank you for the question. It does make it challenging when science really is best sustained by having stability so that investigators out there in all the states of our nation and some outside our nation are able to pursue research with the confidence that there is going to be some support that will not just become somewhat questionable the next year or the next month. And certainly, given the fact that the NIH budget has to be decided upon every year, and it rarely has been decided by October 1st, as you all know, it does make it challenging in terms of how we as science managers try to steer this ship. Particularly now with the uncertainty about the sequesters, which have already been raised, that puts a very significant source of concern as we try to plan where science should go. Most scientific projects do not have a cycle time of a few months. It's more like 3 or 4 years. And so if we're deciding to start down a path with a particular project, we expect to be able to assure that investigator that we're going to support it for that 3 or 4 years. Otherwise, the initial money may go to waste. But yet when we don't know from year to year exactly what our resources will be, that makes it very tough. I was at the BIO meeting yesterday in Boston. This is the Biotechnology Industry Organization. It's their international meeting. And I listened to the discussion at the lunch panel about how the instability in the private sector makes it really hard for biotech companies to know what to do. And boy, did I relate to that. I think we all have this same issue, that stability would be a very desirable pathway if we could achieve it.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about pancreatic cancer research because part of the reason is personal because my mother passed away not long after she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Despite years of funding for cancer research, pancreatic cancer still has a terribly low survival rate, with only about 6% of patients diagnosed with pancreatic cancer alive 5 years later. So there's been real, in my opinion, in talking to others, doesn't seem to have any real improvement in survival for over 30 years. Yet it's my understanding that only 2% of the NCI budget is devoted to pancreatic cancer research. Could you explain, I know this is not an easy question, but can you explain why the overall cancer 5-year survival rate is 67% and the survival rate for pancreatic cancer is still just 6%? And what is NIH research strategy to improve survival rate for pancreatic cancer patients?
Well, I appreciate the question, and Mr. Lance already raised this issue, and I'm certainly personally very deeply concerned about the situation with pancreatic cancer, having just lost a friend and who's one of the founders of my field of medical genetics to this disease a couple of weeks ago, Dr. David Ramoyne. Clearly with pancreatic cancer, one of the big problems is the inability to know it's there until it's already very far advanced. Recent data tell us that actually pancreatic cancer doesn't actually grow that quickly, that by the time somebody's diagnosed, they've probably had the cancer for 15 or 20 years.
If I could interrupt you, I know in my mom's case it was because she was jaundiced because of the tumor was affecting, so it was manifested, and my understanding is that's the only time usually, or one of the few times but in most cases they don't see the jaundice.
Exactly, because it's deep in the body in a place where one doesn't have the ability to know there's a lump there. It doesn't create symptoms until very late. So one of the things we desperately need is new approaches to early detection, to catch those cancers a decade sooner, where they probably then could be much better managed. There is a lot of interest and effort going on in terms of both imaging approaches and also biomarkers that might be circulating in peripheral blood that would give a hint that this disease was present long before it was otherwise apparent. The other thing we need to do is to understand how to treat this disease, and to understand that better we need to know what's going on at the molecular level. We have major advances now happening for all cancers, but a big focus on pancreatic cancer.
But it's very little percent of your budget, though. Why is that?
Well, it is modest. I will say it has increased 311% in the last 10 years. So the increase in support for pancreatic cancer is greater than for other cancer types. Clearly, there's a great need to do something to move this along. I will tell you, just recently at the ASCO meeting, there is a whole other set of data about a potential approach to this involving something called protein kinase C that looks extremely promising. The cancer researchers who came away from that said this was the most interesting, potentially exciting thing they'd heard about pancreatic cancer treatment in a long time. So we are working on it. I understand the frustration that people feel, and I'm sure Dr. Varmus and I would be glad to continue that conversation. We've been meeting with the PanCan folks and others. I hope we can work on this together.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman and now yields 5 minutes to the Vice Chairman, Dr. Burgess, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Collins, again, thank you for spending time with us this morning. Let me just stay on the issue of pancreatic cancer for a moment. I had some questions in that regard also, but in our conversation just a few days ago when you informed me about the chronicity aspect to pancreatic cancer, and yeah, as a clinician, I'm always aware that this is a difficult problem to treat. You can't palpate it. There are no skin changes, very little in the way of symptoms until it's well advanced. So marry up, if you will, what might happen in the field of genomics, as well as you referenced protein kinase C, which I assume is a new marker that may be available. Is there a way to couple the ability to discover a vulnerability through knowledge of the human genome with an aggressive marker campaign that actually might lead people who are in the chronic phase of pancreatic cancer, the pre-palpable form, if you will, that would then lend them to a degree of earlier treatment than they've ever received before?
Doctor, that's a really wonderful model that we are very much embracing and trying to pursue. So how do we identify individuals at higher risk for this? We know about a few of those risk factors. Certainly family history is one of them. And at least one gene, which happens to be a rather famous one for other reasons, the gene called BRCA2, which places women at risk of breast and ovarian cancer, also increases the risk of pancreatic cancer. So if we had an imaging modality that we were convinced was reliably able to detect a cancer while it's still small and surgically curable, we would want to apply it first to those individuals at higher risk, and that's very much under consideration now. But I think we also want to look for other kinds of markers beyond imaging that may help us detect the presence of disease at the earliest stage. Here's where the whole proliferation of science around the field of genomics is giving us windows into what's going on in the body that we didn't really have until very recently. Are there signals? Are there, in fact, evidences in the immune system that's reacting against the presence of a cancer that we could detect by looking at those immune cells, which, of course, circulate in the body? Those kinds of approaches certainly very much in our front burner, but also the therapeutics. The protein kinase C delta looks as if, let me back up a second. Almost every pancreatic cancer has a mutation in a famous gene called KRAS. It's a driver mutation. It's a major factor for why these good cells went bad. But we don't yet have a way of specifically targeting KRAS. That has not worked. Turns out that just downstream of that, there are other things that happen that are targetable, and that's where this PKC delta has come forward, giving some new ideas. And this is an important paradigm. As we learn more about how things are connected within the cell, even if you can't target the primary problem, you can sneak around and target something that's just upstream or downstream and achieve the same result. That's what a lot of science about cancer right now is aimed at. There's a meeting going on organized by the AACR yesterday at Stanford. I'm waiting to hear what other new ideas came from that in terms of pancreatic cancer diagnosis and treatment.
Now, is this an example of where that translational research that crosses all of the silos at NIH, is this where that is helpful?
Absolutely. Certainly, companies are intensely interested in developing cancer therapeutics. I've spent a lot of time with pharmaceutical companies in the last couple of years trying to be sure that we're partnering effectively. And cancer is an area where they are also very excited because of all these new molecular discoveries. But there can still be these bottlenecks about how do you pick the right targets from a long list that's emerging from things like the Cancer Genome Atlas. And then how do you, once you've picked that target, move it quickly to the point where you can be confident it's going to be safe and potentially effective in a patient. There are all kinds of steps there.
And then are you equipped to deal with your counterparts at the FDA, because there can be other bottlenecks outside of the walls of your hallowed institution that can present a problem?
Peggy Hamburg and I, when we first came to our respective roles at FDA and NIH, formed a joint leadership council to tackle exactly this kind of circumstance. Are there areas where NIH and FDA can inform each other, work together? Can we provide regulatory science platforms that would assist them in making decisions about what's safe and effective? Can they educate us about the ways in which investigators that we support could be smarter about how they design their approaches, both preclinical and clinical, so that they'll end up with the data that FDA needs for approval?
In the brief time I have left, do you have a couple of examples that you could provide to us of things that have been successful?
So one that we're working on right now is a new approach to preclinical toxicology. Now that sounds, when I was a medical school student, student, I would have thought that must be a really boring science, but it's actually really interesting. How do you decide that a particular chemical compound that you would like to try out in a clinical trial is safe to do that? Generally, we've used animal models, small animals, large animals, and we look for a signal that maybe that compound is causing trouble in liver or heart. Now we can do that more cleverly, and we're doing this as a partnership with FDA and with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, building biochips that are loaded up with human cells, representing three-dimensional examples of human liver cells, heart cells, kidney, brain, and so on, and using that as a test of whether a compound is safe or not by looking to see whether those cells get happy or unhappy when you give them a particular test substance. That could be much faster and much more accurate. And it's an example of how we and the FDA have gotten together and said, there's a bottleneck, let's tackle it, let's do something about it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thanks, gentlemen. And now yields to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Collins, it's got to be very difficult to go year by year without knowing what your budget's going to be. That's got to lead to a lot of instability. But you're facing something, as are other parts of our government, much more dramatic at the end of this year. The sequestration, or what it really means is across-the-board cuts that was called for in last year's budget agreement. And that will go into effect in January unless the Congress changes things. And it looks like we're still deadlocked on changing things. By the Congressional Budget Office estimate, this would mean an approximately 8% reduction in NIH's budget, or roughly $2.4 billion yet less available funding, taking NIH back to its 2004 funding levels. If this funding went into effect, at least 2,300 fewer grants would be awarded. I assume this is on your mind, and it's on the minds of a lot of people. Back in my Southern California district, people are talking about in the aerospace and defense industry, how do they make plans for the sequestration? And I know as a government leader, you have to make plans for your sequestration. What's your thinking about it? How would NIH absorb this $2.4 billion in lost funding? What cuts would you make? Would you make it across the board? Would you pick and choose which institute and centers get hit by how much? And if you made a decision not just across the board, what criteria would you use to pick and choose?
Well, Mr. Waxman, this is certainly on my mind. In fact, it's on my mind sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning. If there is something that I am most concerned about in terms of an event that could really disrupt and do serious damage to the progress that we now see in medical research, this is it. You've correctly quoted the numbers as I understand them from the CBO about what the sequesters would do to NIH. And that loss of 2,300 grants, which would come already 3 months into the fiscal year, would represent about a quarter of the total grants we would give for that entire year. Exactly how that would be distributed, of course, would depend upon scientific priorities, but it would clearly stretch across all areas. There would be cuts in cancer and diabetes and heart disease. There would be cuts in common diseases and rare diseases. There would be cuts in basic science. There would be cuts in training. We would have to basically spread the pain. We wouldn't do it in a completely blind fashion like a haircut, but everybody's hair would get cut pretty significantly. There would be a lot of people with very short hair at the end of this. So I think maybe if people understood a little better than we've been able perhaps to convey just how much momentum there is right now and how much enthusiasm and anxiety there is amongst our biomedical research workforce, which is our most precious resource, the consequences of this perhaps would become more apparent. Clearly, if you're an investigator coming to NIH with your best and brightest idea, we already are at the lowest rates in history for success in getting your grant funded, about 17%, where we've traditionally been at 30%. To drop that even further, which would clearly happen dramatically were the sequesters to kick in, might deal a blow to many of those investigators that they simply would not be able to sustain.
One of the reasons that we haven't been able to work all these problems out is that the Republicans who run the Congress are afraid to increase taxes even on billionaires. I have a lot of wealthy people that I know. A lot of them live in my district. I can't imagine if they heard these kinds of results would happen at NIH and other areas, they wouldn't be willing to say, look, we'll put in more money. This is an important function of the government. We shouldn't allow this to happen. I was struck by the statistic in your testimony that we've identified the causes of nearly 4,500 diseases, but only have the effective treatments for roughly 20% of them. So the new initiatives that we have in the Cures Acceleration Network sounds very promising, but we've got a lot of work to do, even if we can get by this sequestration issue. Isn't that the case?
We do, and it's both a wonderful new opportunity because of proliferation of new discoveries about the molecular causes of disease that we just didn't know until recently. But we don't want to have them just sit there as publications that everybody says, wow, look what we've discovered. We want to move that forward to therapeutics. I'm working with the pharmaceutical industry on a initiative where together we might try to look at where are the highest priority new targets, because in many ways there's so many of them now, you have to decide where's your best chance of success. So we just ran a pair of workshops on what's called target validation with industry R&D chiefs getting together with academic leaders and NIH to talk about how we could together move this forward in a way that will accelerate translation, accelerate moving that number that have diseases that can be treated higher and quicker. That's our goal.
Thank you very much. My time has expired.
Chair,
appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, you're calling on me.
Chair, thanks to the gentleman, and now yields to the Chair Emeritus of the full committee, Mr. Barton, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've got the answer to what to do about our deficit. We'll just do a special tax on Chairman Waxman's rich people in his district. Apparently, they want to pay higher taxes, and Mr. Waxman wants them to. So, if we can find a way to do it constitutionally, I'll be a co-sponsor of that bill. So, anyway, to get back to the hearing. Dr. Collins, you and I have had several meetings in my office, so I just want to get on the record some of the things that you told me in our private conversations. What's your view of the Common Fund that the reauthorization bill back in 2006 created?
Well, Mr. Barton, Common Fund, I think, has been a brilliant addition to NIH's ability to support high-risk but high-reward projects that don't fit neatly within the remit of any one of the 27 institutes and centers, but could actually have profound impact on all diseases and all organ systems. As the NIH director, one of the most important opportunities I have is provided by the Common Fund, which you and Dr. Zerhouni discussed, and which this committee then put forward and is now put in statute as part of what we are aiming to do in that space of sort of venture capital. And I think of it as our venture capital. And it has funded a variety of really quite remarkable projects. I just mentioned one, the Human Microbiome Project, which was much written about in the last 10 days or so in the press, because of a series of about 36 publications that came out describing those microbes that live on us and in us in breathtaking detail in ways that clearly make it possible for us to understand how we interact with them for health or sometimes for disease. This is really a nice example of something that probably couldn't have happened without the Common Fund support.
What's the funding level right now in that fund? What's your balance?
It's about $500 million, which means it's only about 1.6, 1.7% of the total NIH budget. The authorization would be to carry it all the way to 5% if the budget of NIH as a whole were able to grow. It's been difficult in the past few years to be able to change that percentage.
How much do you obligate each year approximately from that Common Fund?
So most of the projects that are funded by the Common Fund are funded for 5 years. So while it varies from year to year depending on what is moving out and what's moving in, then it would be roughly 20% of that 500. So about $100 million each year.
Okay. If Chairman Upton and Ranking Member Waxman, Mr. Pallone, and Mr. Pitts were interested in doing another reauthorization bill of NIH, What are some items that you think should be included in that bill if we were to do a new reauthorization bill?
You know, I'd have to think hard about exactly what would require that kind of step. You did such a good job in 2006 that many of the issues that needed attention were very effectively dealt with. So there's much shorter lists now, I think, of urgencies. But I'd be
If you could give that some thought and formally let the committee know, I'd appreciate that.
Happy to.
In my last minute and a half, I want to go to a little more sensitive subject. Title 42. I think, as you know and the committee knows, this is a special title that gives the ability to pay above SES level salaries to very special people to keep them in government service or to attract them to government service. It was intended to be sparingly used and for almost exceptional or at least potentially exceptional employees. I think it's been misused. You may not share that view. Could you tell us what % of the employees at NIH right now generally received Title 42 compensation?
So we have 19,000 employees at NIH, and roughly 24.8% of them are in the Title 42 appointment mechanism. These are mostly individuals with doctoral level training. And we have recently, working with HHS, instituted a new policy where only doctoral level individuals will be eligible for Title 42 appointments, changing a practice that has been present in the past, which we now feel we should not continue.
And on balance, I know there's really no such thing as an average Title 42 salary, but could you give a general idea of what a Title 42 salary is as compared to the highest SES salary?
Well, the vast majority of Title 42 salaries are below $200,000. Again, these are PhD or MD PhD level individuals. Only a small percentage, about 465 of these, are at salaries above $200,000, and those are the individuals at the highest level of seniority and expertise. Those are institute directors, people like Dr. Fauci. I'll have to tell you, Mr. Barton, and you and I have discussed this, if we did not have this hiring ability, we would not be able to recruit the best and brightest to come and join our scientific and medical workforce. And if one wants NIH to be the most excellent scientific and medical research organization in the world, we have to be able to recruit those people. We are still paying them less on the average than they could get in a university and much less than they could get in the private sector. And we are counting, therefore, on their public spiritedness. But at least to be in the game, Title 42 helps us to be able to make.
I know my time's expired. I am preparing draft language to reform the Title 42 program. I'll be sharing it with the committee leadership and NIH. And you had indicated that you had some thoughts too. If you'd care to get those to my office, I'd appreciate that.
Be happy to
do
that.
And I thank the chairman's discretion and yield back to the chair.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen, and would remind the members we're going to be facing a time constraint when we hit the floor vote. So if you can constrain your time, please. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Sequestration, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Collins, in a recent article, you expressed concerns that if the odds get worse than the current rate of 1 in 7 grant applications receiving NIH funding, which would occur if NIH funding is cut, we may lose this generation of young researchers. Could you discuss what this would mean to our ability to discover new medical breakthroughs and to maintain our global leadership in biomedical research?
Well, certainly young investigators and investigators in mid-career and our senior leaders are all feeling the stress here in terms of the difficulty of getting supported in the current climate, whereas, as you've mentioned and I cited earlier, the success rates have fallen to the lowest levels that we've ever seen. That means that investigators spend an inordinate amount of their time writing new grant applications, just missing the pay line, revising, trying something else, instead of actually doing the research. So it's a very inefficient use of their time. particularly for investigators just starting out who are trying to identify a path for them. Are they going to be able to pursue the ideas that got them interested in this field in the first place? This can be very demoralizing when after several tries you still have not succeeded in receiving funds. We try to do everything we can to give those early stage investigators a leg up. They compete against each other instead of against more experienced investigators, but there's only so much we can do. And clearly, I hear from them on a regular basis, those that have really kind of reached the end of the line. And some of them are simply saying, I can't keep doing this anymore. I'm going to find some other kind of work. I'll go to teaching instead of doing research. Maybe I'll go to law school. Maybe I'll think about another country. And certainly when it comes to those who have come to our scientific workforce from other countries, and we've depended on that talent for many years and been greatly benefited by it, and many of those individuals stay in our country and become our leaders, they're much less likely to do that now. With these stresses upon them and with much more attractiveness of positions being offered to them in places like China and India, which are increasing their support for biomedical research at a dramatic rate, even as ours is losing ground to inflation. So it's not a pretty picture. If we are determined to maintain the leadership that America has enjoyed in biomedical research for the past 20 or 30 years, we can't just assume that that will happen because it has in the past. We clearly have to look, as a recent study done by the Information Technology Innovation Foundation, at how America is stacking up in global competitiveness. And it's not an easy thing to look at if one is interested in seeing our economic future be as bright as it needs to be.
And what happens to the research itself, aside from the researchers, if there's a start and a stop? Are we hamstringing ourselves in that regard?
Certainly, science tends to build on itself, and if a good idea has been started and there's something that you've added to that that takes you in a new direction, you don't want to see that simply go on hold while waiting for the next cycle of potential research support. And certainly scientists are themselves people we invest in. If you're talking about a doctoral level individual at a university, we've probably helped train them through a training grant or through their participation in research. So we already have a big investment in that person. And the idea that we might now lose that investment by not being able to sustain their career is a double loss.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll yield back, but I thank you, Dr. Collins, for your response.
Chair thanks the gentlelady and recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey, for 5 minutes for questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Collins, in a recent meeting, NIMA, July 27th of 2011, you charged the research centers at Minority Institutions Transitional Research Network, RTRN, with providing additional opportunities for multi-site clinical and translational research among minority and collaborating institutions. What will be the proactive strategy of the National Center for Advancing Translational Science, NCATS, and NIH to collaborate and enhance the capability of RTRN to accelerate its missions to address health disparities? I know that's a mouthful, and I'm sure you followed that. I'll be glad to repeat it if you would like for me to do that. But
no, I think I get the gist of it. Thank you, Dr. Gingrey. Clearly, the need to work intensively on health disparities is one of our most challenging and most important missions. And we have, in fact, over the years, identified institutions that are particularly well designed to do so. And we have an entire institute at NIH, the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities, with that focus. We just last week held a meeting of my advisory committee where I asked a very high-level group to focus on this whole question of diversity in our workforce, which is another component of this. And they made a number of very strong recommendations about what we should be doing in order to increase the numbers of individuals who work in medical research who themselves come from underrepresented groups. Oftentimes, those individuals have special interest in health disparities and oftentimes are our best researchers in those areas. So there's a great deal of interest in promoting this through various programs, through NIMHD, through the RCMI program, and I'm certainly strongly in support of all of those initiatives, because I do think we have not made as much progress as we should in dealing with the fact that not all populations enjoy the same health as all others, and what are the ways that we in research can identify the causes and interventions.
Dr. Collins, thank you for that answer. Of course, we need to see a return on investment for taxpayers' dollars, especially in areas that impact so many Americans. And one costly disease that estimates impact 26 million Americans is diabetes. Medical costs of Americans with diabetes are more than twice those without the disease. So in light of these rather startling but accurate figures, I recently shared my support for the Special Diabetes Program in a letter circulated by my colleagues, Representative Whitfield and DeGette. Can you share with the committee the return on investment of this program, and how is it helping Americans burdened by diabetes?
Appreciate the question. I agree with you. This is an urgent matter for our country. Not only are there those 20-some million individuals with diabetes, there are about 70 million with prediabetes who, if nothing is done, are likely to become diabetic in the not-too-distant future. This is a very high priority for research. Is everything okay? Okay, maybe get her down on the floor. She should be laid down on the floor as quickly as possible. Sorry, I think she's okay. That seemed like an orthostatic event. Coming back to diabetes. Did we lose Dr. Gingrey? Is he attending to the patient?
Dr. Gingrey's got out with the patient. So he'll have to follow up in writing.
Okay, I'd be happy to follow up for the record.
All right. At this time, we'll yield to the Ranking Member Emeritus, Mr. Dingell, for 5 minutes for questions.
Good morning, Doctor. I'd like to begin by asking this question. Would you please submit for the record information regarding the proposed merger of NIDA and NIAA? And I would hope that you would give us the premises under which the budget neutrality of the combining of these two institutes was established.
Be happy to submit that for the record.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, do you believe that NIH has lost purchasing power over the years due to inflation, and that this now impairs the ability of your employees and grantees to do good science? Yes or no?
In my professional judgment, sir, yes.
Doctor, while I recognize that all of China's biomedical research is funded by the government, and that the U.S. has the advantage of government and private sector funding, which is critical to creativity and innovation, it is notable that China is significantly increasing its spending on scientific research and the state-of-art facilities. Is it fair to say that at this rate, Chinese may outspend us in biomedical research in the foreseeable future? Yes or no?
Yes, it's fair to say that, sir.
Now, Doctor, do you think that the loss of American research dominance could lead to a decrease in investment dollars and jobs in our scientific arena? Yes or no?
In the sense that clearly NIH research supports jobs, about 7 jobs for every grant? Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, the University of Michigan, with which I'm sure you're familiar, is a large research institution in my district. And I know you have roots back in Ann Arbor. So this brings, and I'm sure you agree, that this brings a lot of promising young constituent scientists into my office and into Washington. Many of them share with me their fears and frustrations about how difficult it is to get good science funded properly and to generate a sustainable career. Previously, NIH was able to fund 30% of new grant applications. Today, the number has decreased to 17%. Do you believe this dearth of funding will drive the students the federal government has invested in away from research?
So those same individuals come to see me after they come to see you. And yes, they are deeply concerned, and some of them are being driven away.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, finally, Understanding how NIH sets its research priorities is important to us here in the Congress and to patients throughout the country. As members of Congress, we get inundated by advocacy groups requesting more NIH resources dedicated to their own particular disease or disease concerns, and to support the legislation which would move research in their disease forward. While the suffering and frustration that is here is not easily cured, I also recognize that allocating funding based on which advocacy groups have the most presence on the Hill hurts other diseases such as rare diseases. Is this an accurate statement, yes or no?
With great sympathy for those advocacy groups, it is a risk of having one battle against the other. We would be better to support all of those.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this important hearing. As this Congress knows, science, technology, engineering, and math are the future of this country's economy, and we have to be at the cutting edge of all. Both parties, Democrats and Republicans, acknowledge the importance of working steadfastly to promote the training of our youth in these fields in order to secure our title as the world's leader in innovation and to bring the blessings that comes with that kind of activity. Today, the National Institutes of Health is the premier biomedical research institution in the whole world, dedicated to promoting the public's health and well-being through research. The NIH has also had the foresight to recognize that cutting-edge advances in areas such as biology with the forefront of technology is where the next generation of life-altering advances will come from. So it's easy to see then how NIH's ability to be competitive in worldwide research is not only critical to our citizens, but also to our economy. And I worry that the United States may be losing its competitive edge and that countries like China may be taking away the jobs and the future of our young people. So, Dr. Collins, I appreciate your assistance here, your presence today. And, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your kindness in this matter.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen, and recognize the gentlelady, Ms. McMorris-Rogers, 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you. I just barely got through it.
Thank the chairman, and I want to thank Dr. Collins for coming today, and I echo the comments and just so appreciate your leadership at NIH and everything that you are doing. Appreciated your testimony this morning. I had the opportunity recently to meet with Dr. Chris Austin from NCATS and was very excited to learn about NCATS and particularly one pilot project, the Discovering New Therapeutic Uses for Existing Molecules program. And I understand that this program will bridge the, quote, valley of death that we hear so much about during the FDA reauthorization process. I wanted to ask, do you think that this kind of an expansion of a role at NIH is going to improve NIH and better reflect the healthcare needs in our country, given that some are suggesting that this kind of a mission could, this kind of an expansion of a mission from medical research to drug development may be beyond what NIH should be doing?
Well, I understand the concern, and certainly when NCATS was first being rolled out, there was a lot of misunderstanding about what its goals really were. I asked a distinguished group of experts from the private sector, people like Moncef Slaoui of GSK, Mark Tessier-Levine, recently of Genentech, Brooke Byers, venture capital expert, to look at the NCATS potential and advise me about whether this really made sense in terms of advancing the cause of developing new therapeutics in a fashion that built on NIH's sweet spots and was not sort of a deviation from what our mission should be. They started out intensely quizzical and ended up wildly enthusiastic, and I'd be glad to share their report with this committee. That certainly encourages the conclusion that we are moving in a place that science now allows us to do, in a partnership with the private sector to make sure that we are collaborating effectively, but with the main goal of speeding up this development of therapeutics. This is not, however, going to detract from our basic science engine, which is, of course, the critical way in which we develop new ideas for treatments of the future. That will remain about 50% or 51% of what we do. it's mostly reorganizing capabilities that we had, and you learned about some of those from Dr. Austin, into a more effective engine for doing this kind of discovery focused on the bottlenecks.
Well, and it seems like a common sense approach in starting to break down some of the silos that so often are difficult for us. On another vein, I know that you're aware of the specific biologic link between Down syndrome, that duplicate 21st chromosome, and Alzheimer's disease. I'm also aware that people with Down syndrome appear to have a protection from the development of some types of cancer. And this seems to be a population from which many researchers could learn many things, not only that would help people with Down syndrome, but to help the general public. And I wanted to ask, what other efforts do you see as a catalyst for improving collaboration between scientists and institutions?
Well, I do agree that Down syndrome is an important model for understanding a variety of things, and you've mentioned the Alzheimer's risk, which we believe comes about because on that 21st chromosome is the gene for beta amyloid, and it's amyloid that builds up in the brain of individuals with Alzheimer's, and Down syndrome individuals have extra amounts of it because of that extra chromosome. This fact that there's a protection against cancer is recently come to light and is certainly intriguing, suggesting that we could learn something there as well. I know you've spoken with Dr. Guttmacher, who's the director of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, and he has now recently formed a Down syndrome consortium, bringing together NIH and a variety of other organizations to focus on such things as, should there be a Down syndrome registry to be able to be sure that we have the maximum opportunity to collect that kind of data and even to offer clinical trial participation in a broader way. And I'm excited to see where that goes. I'm trained as a geneticist myself. Certainly Down syndrome has taught us much, and we owe those individuals and their families everything we can in terms of understanding how that extra chromosome results in all the consequences that it does. So it's an area of great, intense current interest.
Thank you, and much potential. I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
Chair, thanks. Gentlelady recognized the gentleman from New York, Mr. Towns, 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this hearing. And thank you very much, Dr. Collins, for coming. My question, Dr. Collins, is according to the most recent available data in the area that I represent, Brooklyn, 72,000 children in Brooklyn suffer from asthma. And I know the disease disproportionately impacts children in high poverty neighborhoods, but there is a pocket of middle class, and of course the principal, actually the superintendent of the school, indicated that a third of the kids in that school that reside in that area that had missed 50 days or more of school because of asthma. And they have not been able to determine in terms of what is really going on in that area. Is there any kind of special grants that you could have to look at a situation like that?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I certainly agree that asthma is a cause of great concern, and NIH has major programs focused on research in this condition, primarily through the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And asthma has been increasing in its frequency in children, and certainly that is also somewhat of a puzzle. Clearly, asthma is a classic example of a genetic environment interaction. We know it runs in families. I had severe asthma as a child, as did two of my brothers. And yet it is not sufficient to have the genetic risk. There are triggers, and we think that some of those that we know about are animal hair and feathers and house dust mites, which is a big part of this. But to actually develop better interventions is a big part of what we're now trying to do. And it does seem that one of the things, Mr. Towns, that we have to understand better is to how to break this disease, which we just call asthma, into subsets that are actually different in terms of their natural history, in terms of their response to therapy, and try to see whether within that disease are actually 10 different diseases that if we understood them better, we would realize how to personalize the approach to prevention and treatment. And that is one of the things that is making some progress, in part built upon genetics, because we are understanding now what some of those risk factors are, and which kids have which risk factor may in fact have a lot to do with their response to treatment. But we have a ways to go. Clearly, this is an area that In terms of pediatrics, the Child Health Institute also intense interest in. We're running a number of clinical trials to try to test out new approaches. It is right in that space of needing to encourage translation that we've been talking about this morning.
Right. And I know that the merger, I think the former chairman of the committee, I think, mentioned in terms of the merger. Have you looked at the merger from a cost analysis? Have you done that already?
You're talking about the merger between the Drug Abuse Institute and the Alcohol Institute?
That's correct.
Basically, what we are doing is thinking about how we could best support the science of addiction by bringing together grants that are funded through these two institutes and putting them under one roof. There is no expectation here of a shrinkage or an expansion of the overall portfolio, but a rearrangement of the way in which they are overseen. So the cost should essentially not be changed more than a small amount based on simply perhaps a small amount of administrative savings from having one institute instead of two, although I really wouldn't want to emphasize that as being particularly significant because almost all of our budget goes into the grant portfolio, and we would not expect that to change.
And so research funding will not be impacted by this?
It will not. The overall research funding envelope for addiction research will remain in the same place. Now, it may be that over the course of time, science will drive that in certain directions so that some parts of addiction research will get more attention than others. That's the nature of our business, but we will keep that total support for addiction research on the same path that it's been on.
Right. Let me just, my time is about almost expired. Let me ask, back to asthma again. Is there any areas in the country where you've seen this, where it's a middle class or an area where you have this high asthma rate?
Absolutely.
You have?
And do you know, there is a theory, in fact, there's a piece about it today in the Times, that one of the problems that we have in some environments is that our efforts to make the environment squeaky clean has actually increased the likelihood of asthma. That in the old days, when children were exposed to lots of different kinds of dirt substances or infectious disease substances early in their life, they learned how to deal with that. And if in some way we protected kids against that kind of exposure, their immune systems haven't gotten revved up when they were supposed to, so they get over-revved up later on. There's a fair amount of support for that theory, and that may apply particularly in circumstances where there are a lot of resources in the family and a lot of attention to having everything spick and span.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Chair,
Chairman.
thanks, gentlemen, and recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Cassidy, 5 minutes for questions.
Hey, Dr. Collins, thank you for being here. There was an article by Gillum, first author, NIH funding levels and burden of disease. It relates to the interval between 96 and 2006, so not your watch, but still. And it speaks about how in 96, only about 39% of the variance between what a disease, if you will, is funded relative to its disease, disability-associated life years, et cetera, was explained by objective factors. And actually, from between 96 and 2006, that actually declined from like 39% to 33%. On your watch, can you tell us that there is now a better correlation between how diseases are funded relative to their impact upon mortality, morbidity, disability, et cetera? Because I'm looking at your website, it's very difficult for me to figure out if that is the case or not.
Well, thank you for the question, Dr. Cassidy. Certainly one of the things the Reform Act gave us the opportunity to do was to form a new division, a division that has as part of its mandate doing portfolio analysis systematically across the entire NIH, trying to identify whether we have a reasonable match between public health needs and our own investments in research. And we now have more tools to do that, certainly, than they did in 2006, especially now that all of our grants are online and you can compute on them and see what they're actually covering. So we are looking at that with more capability and more intensity.
Now, can I interrupt just for a second, because time's so limited, I apologize. Yes. When I look at the funding back in 2006, where, for example, AIDS, HIV, particularly if you had pediatric HIV, incredibly important disease, is getting far more than ischemic heart disease, even though ischemic heart disease is the leading cause of death. And obesity, which you mentioned in your written testimony as being so important, affecting 30% of our population, is, I think, 40th in terms of the ranking of your priority as you have it listed. Now, there's some double counting, so maybe it's higher, but it's like, I think, $800 million a year versus $2.5 billion. So it seems, since that was also in 1996 and 2006, its relative ranking. Has there really been that much change?
There has probably been a little, but let me say, I think one needs to be careful not to have this kind of analysis based on dailies be the sole way in which decisions are made about research opportunity. In addition to public health needs, there are circumstances where science provides lots of opportunity for things to go quickly, and others where simply throwing the money at the problem, there's no great new idea.
But there's no way to know that previously, right? There can be a paradigm shift, and so suddenly what seemed like throwing money is opening a door.
Well, right. So there is a connection there. That analysis, by the way, seemed to indicate that Alzheimer's disease actually was getting the kind of support that maybe it should. And I think I would...
No. What I see on Alzheimer's disease, when I just looked at it, and again, you mentioned that in your written testimony, it is really way down there in its funding. I had it written down someplace, but in my mess, I can't tell you. But it was really, I was struck how low the funding is relative to its potential burden.
In that regard, as you know, and this may come up in other speakers, certainly Alzheimer's has emerged as a scientific opportunity in the last few years, and everybody would agree as a major public health initiative. So we have made significant new investments in the current fiscal year of an additional $50 million for Alzheimer's.
But relative to its overall burden, $50 million is nice in an absolute number. Man, I wish I had $50 million. On the other hand, relative to your overall funding, again, I'm struck that HIV/AIDS has remained at the top, $2.5 billion, and then ischemic heart disease is here, obesity is there, and Alzheimer's really here. So in terms of an absolute amount, that's a lot, but in terms of its future burden to our society, it almost seems minuscule. So let me ask you, how often do your councils actually redirect funding?
That's their job. So
But
every
do they
time
do
the
it?
council meets, they look at the grants that are in front of them, they decide what new requests for applications to approve. That's their job.
But how often do they do that?
Oh, the NIH councils are looking at new requests for applications which steer money in a new direction every time.
So if I were to look at time, at your funding over time, I could see between these different categories that there would be a significant shift between funding levels?
You would see some shift. Again, it would
Now,
not be
some
solely
is an
driven by
elastic
dailies.
term,
It would be driven also by scientific opportunities, and some of those don't match, as we just said a minute ago.
But if the correlation was 33% in 2006, is that correlation better now? Do you follow what I'm saying with disease burden, et cetera? Because scientific opportunity is frankly inertia to a certain extent.
So
this is what we've always funded. They've got a lab set up, and we're going to continue a grant. It may be. I'm out of time. We've got to vote, but I'll submit that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. We are being called to vote on the floor with 20 votes and a motion to recommit. It's going to go a while. Dr. Collins has other commitments. So I would suggest that we go to at least 1 minute per member so everyone can get an opportunity to ask questions. If that's okay, we'll go to Mr. Lance from New Jersey, 1 minute for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Collins, for your enormous service to the nation, and I look forward to working with you on the pancreatic cancer issue. I recently was made aware of a June 2011 article that you wrote entitled Mining for Therapeutic Gold, and I was interested that you mentioned the need for incentives for further development and commercialization, and the importance of intellectual property considerations. Sir, would you please elaborate on the challenges that intellectual property considerations present?
Very briefly, I would like to see intellectual property used in a way that I think Ben Franklin intended, which is as an incentive for commercial development. When it is used in that way, it benefits everybody, the public. When it's used prematurely to claim intellectual property on information that really should be in the public domain, then it can actually have a counteractive effect.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. It goes to Mr. Latta from Ohio for 1 minute for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since Dr. Gingrey had to render assistance, I yield my minute to him.
Mr. Chairman, I sincerely thank the gentleman from Ohio, and Mr. Chairman, I thank you also. I know that I was in the midst of asking a question of Dr. Collins in regard to the special diabetes program, and I was informed that you will respond, Dr. Collins, to that question in a written format. Let me just take the remaining seconds of the minute that my friend from Ohio has yielded to me to thank you, Dr. Collins, for responding to the minor medical emergency that occurred. The young lady is fine, but I think it should reassure every member of this panel, of this committee, of the quality and character of our witness today, and you can find that out by reading his bio. I did. We have a lot in common. That chemistry degree you got, and of course went on and got an advanced degree in physical chemistry, but when you finally took a biochemistry course, you decided you wanted to become a physician. I took that first physical chemistry course and made a D in it, and I knew immediately that I wanted to become a physician. So we have a lot in common. I just thank you for your compassion and kindness of responding to the medical emergency. Thank you, Dr. Collins.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks, gentlemen, and yields to Dr. Murphy from Pennsylvania. 1 minute.
Dr. Collins, recently when we met, I had asked you how much is spent of NIH grants on overhead and indirect costs. You said it ranges from 60 to 90%. I believe most universities are around 50%. I understand indirect cost rates for private research funded by Leukemia and Lymphoma Society is 25%. Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation is 20%. Bruce Alberts of the University of California in San Francisco said schools reliance on the NIH to pay not only the salaries of scientists but also the overhead or indirect costs of buildings and construction and maintenance is a perverse incentive that encourages U.S. universities, medical centers, and other research institutions to expand their research capacities. In 2006, Yale University, with an endowment of $18 billion, received $348 million in federal research grants. Their own spending in the university for research, $29 million. Stanford University, with an endowment of $14 billion, received $540 million in federal research funds and only spent $40 million of its own money for research. MIT, with an endowment of $10.5 million, $476 million in federal research funds, spent only $10 million of its own money. Their endowment is $8.3 billion. Harvard University, a $40 billion endowment, larger than the NIH budget. They spend zero of their own dollars on research, but they have 75% overhead costs. Can you justify this for the U.S. taxpayers and other researchers who cannot get funding for pancreatic cancer, cystic fibrosis, mitochondrial disease? Why you do it this way when these universities aren't spending their own money?
I know I have very little time. Again, NIH does not set the indirect cost rates.
But other places can do it for 20 or 25% overhead. I recognize this is a huge question. As an adjunct associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh, which is a recipient of a lot of NIH funding, I hope we can talk more about this because it deeply concerns us to have money available. The answer is not just to raise taxes, but I really hope that's something we can work more with you on to find some solutions.
Happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen, and recognize gentlelady Ms. Mark. 1 minute for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Dr. Collins. I'm sure that you believe holding the integrity of the peer review process is very important, not only because of scientific reasons, but also because of the taxpayer dollars spent. I've got a question about conflict of interest at NIH relative to the selection of scientific review groups and study sections. Just looking at this one list of chair and members of a particular behavioral science group, it looks like several of the individuals who are serving or have served received grants while they were actually serving on the board who determines who gets the grants. And, you know, some of them, a couple of them, one of them was meth addicts to take their medicine, that kind of thing. So my question really is, does that not run counter to the conflict of interest? And would you, you know, at least I know our time's short, but could you get back to me in writing? And then I've got a couple other I would like to submit to you.
I'd be happy to get back to you. We have, I think, very careful methods in place to try to avoid that kind of conflict. So somebody in that position would not have their grant reviewed by that same.
Well, this particular one says that they actually did receive the grant. So I'll get it to you.
Let's talk
Thank you.
Chair, thanks. Gentlelady. It goes to Mr. Bill Bray for 1 minute for questions.
Doctor, what percentage of NIH's research goes right from the researchers to the consumer in medical service?
I mean, direct clinical application.
Right.
I would say a rather small proportion because generally it has to go through commercialization.
What percentage of your research goes through the private sector commercialization?
The vast majority.
Give us a percentage.
Again, 51% of our budget is basic science, which doesn't have a specific commercial connection when it's being done, although it may ultimately.
But it's fair to say an essential component of getting your research to the patient is the private sector involvement in the transition from basic research to practical application.
Absolutely. And a central component of their success is our providing them with that information.
Are you aware there are some people in that field of venture capital for medical research that have indicated that we could have in the last few years lost almost 50% of venture capital that builds that bridge between your research and the patients who need the breakthroughs?
There has been a serious stress on that system, for sure.
I've been informed that because of the Valley of Death not being closed and other regulatory issues, that there is a possibility we could lose a half of what exists of what's left over. What kind of impact will that have in this country if we don't have that private sector investment to be able to bridge that gap between your research and the patients?
Well, it would be devastating. We need that partnership.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I'd just like to point out, Mr. Chairman, that it's been estimated we have $1.4 to $2 trillion of American dollars overseas. And one of the things that my research people said, that maybe Democrats and Republicans could get together and say, look, if you put your foreign capital into medical research here in the United States, that both sides of the aisle should agree not to take 35% of that in federal taxes, but to basically focus it to this bridge in this gap. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, and recognize gentleman, Mr. Markey, 1 minute for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Dr. Collins, if sequestration goes into effect on January 1st of next year and across-the-board cuts occur, will there be reductions in research for Alzheimer's at NIH in terms of the grants?
Absolutely, as well as reductions in virtually all the fields that we support.
So just as we recognize that we spent $140 billion in Medicare and Medicaid last year on Alzheimer's patients, would begin to reduce the research for the cure for Alzheimer's?
With $2.4 billion being removed from the budget, there'd be no way to actually spare any field of medical research from at least some degree of cut.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. That would be tragic. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for your good work.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. I'm sorry we've been interrupted by floor votes. This is an excellent hearing. We will urge the members to follow up with questions in writing to you. I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit the questions for the record and ask if you'd please respond to the question promptly. Thank you very much, Dr. Collins, for your excellent testimony and answers to our questions. Members should submit their questions by the close of business Friday, July 6th. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.